Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callye Keen. Today I have Jen Obernier. Jen is with Grist Mill Exchange. She has an amazing background. So I want to get into all of this, Jen, and I want to highlight what you're doing right now. But before we jump in and talk about data and speed and your background at the Pentagon and as a neuroscientist and all those wonderful things, same question I ask everybody. What are you passionate about right now?
Yeah. Well, Callye, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to have a chance to chat with you. So what I'm passionate about is by nature, I'm a problem solver. Like day in and day out, I have to solve problems to be a happy person. But after 10 years in the Pentagon, what really lit my fire was how do you make better decisions for mission? And in the end, better decisions really means having the data specifically that you need. You have it in the moment that you need it, and it's in the place where you can actually do something with it. And so joining Grist Mill Exchange was met all the criteria for me to be able to do that kind of work to enable mission from outside of the Pentagon. So that's what lights my fire for today.
I really like this because I told you right before we record, I keep saying this is like a mantra that we say is coherence is speed. So it's not a matter of how much data that we can collect or what we have in a database that we could maybe get. It's not, we see this in GIS, we see this in raw data, we see this in RF data. Our ability to capture far outstrips our ability to use, but coherence means I really just need a small amount of data at the right time to make a decision or to generate intelligence, and that its end effect or its output equals speed. It's not that the data itself moves faster or that it's processed with 1,000 times more GPUs. It's that we have coherence. It's so exciting because that opens up this third lane of conversation of right time, right place, right fit versus raw horsepower on collections or processing, which I think is kind of a rabbit hole because you're in an internal arms race of collections and processing, right? But yeah, I want to talk about that, but I really want to share your background and your journey into this role as CEO. I think is very interesting and really great context for the rest of the conversation because you came to this from this fantastic background and it really gives a lot of relevance to that perspective.
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about what Grist Mill Exchange does in the realm of data. And I think that will make kind of how I ended up here make a lot of sense. And so Grist Mill Exchange is the trusted source for commercial data for governments. And we make it easy and fast for federal agencies to find the specific data that they need and acquire it at the speed of their mission, and then to deliver it into the platform and systems they're using for that decision making. And so my background, we mentioned I was at the Pentagon for 10 years, but I started my career out as a neuroscientist. I got my doctorate and came to Washington, D.C. shortly after 9/11 and was doing science policy work for the National Academy of Sciences. And that's a very different framework for, I think, how most people end up in the DoD and then joining a defense tech company afterwards. So I did that for many years and got to interact with just the smartest people in the world. It was an amazing time. And then I needed some new challenge. And I also wanted to be of service. That's always been a key thing for me. And so I pivoted my career for the first time and moved into Department of Homeland Security and was doing R&D acquisition work. So I was actually an acquisition official, which has served me well through the rest of my career. So did that for a while and then moved into the Defense Department and did about 10 years doing that behind the scenes. Was in Afghanistan for a little while and came back and then went to the Pentagon where I spent just under 10 years doing a lot of policy work there, which was very different from what I had been doing before. Understanding how does policy with a little p, not foreign policy, but the policy DoD instructions and issuances and all that kind of stuff, how does that actually enable mission? Thinking about it from that framework. And so spent many years doing that type of work and became an executive inside the Pentagon. And then at the end of my career there was leaving the Pentagon and was looking for new challenges. And so when I became aware of Grist Mill Exchange, it just lit so many light bulbs for me because this company was founded to solve the problems that I was experiencing when I was inside of the government. And, day in and day out, the job that I had was either to help people make decisions or make those decisions, depending on where I was in my career. And just time and time and time again, we were making decisions that could have been more informed by data, better data. And in particular, the further on in my career it was really commercial data. There's been some estimates that perhaps 80% of the collections that the US government does really could be acquired through commercial sources because of the digitization of our societies. And so the problems that I faced at the time was I knew there was data out there. My teams knew there was data out there, but getting to that data, being able to evaluate that data and then actually acquire that data was at best a 9-month process and usually an 18-month process. And by that point in time, whatever that piece of data was that was important for your decision, that decision is in the rearview mirror. Maybe that data that was being generated by this company, the company has done something else now. They've changed their business model. That data is not available. And so those kinds of acquisition timelines of 18 months to acquire something that's relevant for your mission or your decision right now just wasn't sustainable. And so Grist Mill Exchange was founded to solve those problems. The idea is to bring speed of acquisition, trust in the data. We basically have a data supply chain now, and that needs to be protected just like we're protecting our other supply chains. And then the scale. So I need one piece of data today, but tomorrow I might need 3 or 4 pieces of data. And how do you bring that scale, the vastness of the digital ecosystem to a federal government space?
That's amazing. We've had discussions with multiple different OSINT groups, GIS on-demand groups, different startups or companies that make acquiring data easier. But from our user side, from the government side, this is fairly difficult because even if the data is available, you can't just go to 100 different places and acquire that data. It still needs to be vetted, and that acquisition has to be on a contract. There's many, many barriers to actually going out and getting the data like you might be able to as a private citizen or a private company. But I really like what you said about the supply chain of data. And something that we continuously go back to is this supply chain of innovation, or thinking what does a resilient supply chain look like for this, whether that's user feedback, whether that is for a particular component or raw material, or in this case, if I'm making a device that fuses that commercial data with sensor data or does something else that supports a mission, and then I'm no longer able to get that piece of information, that system, no matter how large, is essentially non-functional. With the speed that we're able to develop new ways of processing data and the speed at which we're able to integrate different systems, fuse them together, to me, this is my equivalent as a hardware person. So bear with me. It's like there's this intense desire to integrate COTS, right? People are like, I want to buy off the shelf things. I'm like, yeah, that sounds really good until you put it together into a rugged mission system with a small form factor. And the manufacturer of that COTS item decides that it would look really cool if they changed the outside and the shape of that product because it's going to save them a nickel. Or that company gets acquired and that product is now obsolete, even though it said it had a X year support. And so having assurance along with data and that data pipeline, to me, in my head, I'm thinking, hey, this is the same problem that everybody's gone out and decided that they're going to go buy a commercial router and shove it into a box. And then it doesn't work because there's software change, footprint change, no longer available, global supply chain. You name your risk and you're ingesting the risk of that supply. And so to look at it from that supply chain resiliency and trust standpoint is like really interesting concept.
Yeah. The idea of, de-risking things is something that we think about a lot along those terms. So it used to be that a single piece of data might be able to solve a decision point, but just like you mentioned, tomorrow's problem may need 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of data, and those pieces of data might come from different sources. And so how do you build a resilient pipeline that allows diversity in where the data is coming from in a trusted fashion. But that pipeline has to be structured in a certain way so that it marries up with the way that governments buy data. And the way that they license data and how they store it and manage it. And so that's really where we sit in the nexus of that. Is this is less of a tech problem and more of a business model problem. How do we create a business model that can connect commercial vendors at scale and help their business models match the way that a government can, because they're limited by policy, and buy data. And so connecting those two things are important. So it provides a lot of options for the government in a manner in which they can, ingest things, acquire things. And then the other part too is that de-risking factor. So you're not only de-risking kind of the acquisition, but what happens if a certain provider, their business model changes, their access changes, the way that they're generating the data changes, the government's need changes. There's constant change in the system. And how do you make it so that that change doesn't shut the whole thing down? So today I need data A, tomorrow I need data B, but I can't go out and set up a whole new contract. So, the idea of what we tried to do is, rather than start with the tech and then build a business model around it, we started with how do we have to have a business model that meets both the commercial sector and the government sector's needs so that they can interact, and then build tech around that. So we have tons of innovative tech that we've put around this, the idea of data discovery at scale, the data delivery at scale. How do you link data sets from disparate places together in a discovery manner, are all things that we've built in. But we started with that core idea of how do we build a business model that connects two very disparate sectors.
And you're supplying this as a service model or subscription model, or so it's scalable from an acquisition standpoint. It's not just, hey, I'm acquiring a set of data and then everything that I need is another budgetary cycle to increase my access. Or can you walk us through, because I think that is really interesting. We're seeing a lot of innovation in working with the innovative changes in acquisition, or companies really just acknowledging this is how the government is allowed to buy. And so my business model has to address the physics of reality, but still supply this capability in a flexible way. So I'm super curious.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that we've been focused on. And that's how the company came to be, was really solving that core problem. And so we do it in a couple different ways. What we try to do is build a very flexible business model that could meet each customer where they are. Whether you're in the United States and you're one of the allied nations, everybody's system is a little bit different. And so how do we create a very flexible system that protects the IP of the commercial vendors, as well as meeting each country however they best do that? And so in some cases, it's a subscription model where they have streaming data that they're interested in and they need that large scale. In some cases, individual customers may just need some historic data and they can just buy a little bit of that. What we've moved into in the last year is this idea of a metered API. So in many cases, in order to make a decision, you don't need a data lake full of data. You need one piece of data inside that data lake, and being able to acquire that piece of data exactly when you need it not only brings speed, but cost efficiency. And so for governments that are overwhelmed with the idea of there's all of this data I need, but on any one day, I only need a portion of this, being able to really select the data that they need, and APIs are an easy way to do that. Setting those up in a trusted manner is a way to help with that.
As much as you can discuss this, like what are some of the really exciting applications, data applications that you're seeing right now? Because there's so much shifting in the market of how we ingest and then utilize data for new forms of intelligence, right?
Yeah. So, when you think about what we're doing, we have made a point of not focusing on any one specific mission use case because those change constantly. And we wanted to be able to flex with where the missions go. You might be a policy desk officer and you need to have, let's say, the predictions for the rice trade for the next year to help inform some discussions you're going to have in a couple months. all the way up to bringing in commercial data to help mission operators. And everything in between. So supply chain is a big area where we see a lot of interest right now. And so the idea is across all of those mission spaces, when you start bringing together the volume of commercial data vendors that we have, we're at 360 at this point in time, and it grows every day. The types of insights that you can glean across that vastness of data is just immense. And so it really allows the government users to just have free reign with their creativity on how they could choose to solve their problems. And one thing that in particular we're really proud of what we've done is the idea of visualizing the discovery of data across so many different data providers, watching end users who understand commercial data, but maybe have not had this level of exposure to what is available. They get in there and their eyes light up and they're just like, I had no idea this was within the realm of possible. And so to bring that into mission spaces is just like the best thing ever.
Why I think this is interesting is obviously AI is this top level thing that people are talking about, and we're shoehorning this AI concept into everything tip to tail, certainly in government. But when I look at what people are trying to do, you can almost look at it from an outside perspective and say, hey, I don't think the information that they actually need, like, and this is coming from me as a startup enablement company, right? Is like, I don't think they're going to automatically have the data that they need to make this successful. But like initially it'll look pretty good, but like long term, the people that have the best data are going to inherently be able to make better decisions. So I see a lot of like AI initiatives, and I really think that they need to be data first. Like what are the systems of record? Where are the resources? Where's the information that I need to be able to make this pilot successful, or make this startup, or make this rapid capability, or make my software factory we're generating this tool for someone to be successful. But it's just like it just can't be any more successful than like just chat GPT prompts, because they need data, right? And they need to be able to like grok that data and turn it into something. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this ingestion of data, AI boom, and like that experience makes something actually work versus just be like kind of a boondoggle.
I mean, there's AI everywhere now. And I think all of us, everyone is grappling with like what this means for us, our companies, the government, all of that. And like when you look at where are AI pilots successful and where do they less successful, there's usually a point around a decision, and that's either a hit or a miss. And what I mean by that is AI pilots that are successful, what they've done is they've identified the decision that the AI model is trying to enable. So rather than focusing on simply optimizing the model, that ends up a lot of times in failure because you're focused on the model, not the decision that the model is supposed to support. And so in many cases, if you're able to identify the actual decision that it's trying to support, by identifying that, you also identify the data that you need. And so that kind of like smart approach to identifying the decision and then figuring out what data feeds that decision, then you put the AI model on top of that. And that's where you see success. Less focus on the mechanics, the technical piece of the AI, like that's very important, but optimizing that doesn't get you the best decision. It's understanding the decision that needs to be made and that people have authority to make and what data supports that, and then approach that with the AI model on top of that. That's where we see the most success.
Yeah, I fully agree. We've had this conversation similarly on the show, but I have this conversation a lot with our deployed systems is if we're trying to actually do a thing, like whether that's make a decision and then take an orchestrated action, really long term is the data strategy is the strategy. So like understanding if I'm going to make this decision, I'll use an analogy for people that are listening. You can think of this as degraded comms. It's like a parallel conversation. Is optimally, I would like to have this perfect world where I have all of the information available and it's like very easy to read as a human being and pick factor 1, 2, and 3 and say, 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6, right? Sure, great. In reality, it can be messy, decisions can be messy, but who has the best data, you're much more likely to win in the decision game, given not just access to it, but understanding what data do I need to make this decision is paramount versus like the actual decision itself is like what must be true for this to be true, or like if I'm going to take this action, what information, what inputs do I need to make these outputs, like as an equation. And so it's easy to make a secondary assumption that having the best data means that I can make the best decision, and that having varied data like that degraded comms, like if I really want to make robust decisions, I need to have varied data because all data has gaps, and maybe I have 5 sources which give me that coherence that we're looking for. It gives me verification or validation. But what happens if I have 4 or 2 or 1, or I have secondary information? Like how can I handle like variegated inputs to have deterministic outputs? I think is a really, really cool conversation. But we coming from this standpoint of like either, it's binary, like I need this, and then I'm going to have a human look at it, and then they're going to make this decision like 1, 1, 2. But we live in a new world, right? And so
Right.
I think of this as like, it's like degraded comms. It's like, I need to have lots of different ways of doing this. Maybe I have to change how I'm acting, moving, processing, what I'm doing to have the same end result or the result that I'm looking at, right?
Well, you raise a really interesting point there, around that idea of it's not just the piece of data, it's is it in the right place? Is it with the other pieces of data that bring coherence? And is it in the place that somebody's making a decision? And so, when I think about who are going to be the power brokers in the future inside the government, in the past, it's always been, well, who has the information? You own the information and you become the power broker. But information's been democratized. Like you can go out in the commercial sector and get almost anything you need at this point in time. And so like I think the power broker kind of idea is going to be shifting. And I think it's going to be shifting from the people who like were generating the data or owned the data to the people who know how to integrate the data and know how to develop the pipes to move it to where it needs to be so that you can bring in the 3 or 4 different sources, that you can have it in the place where coherence happens, that you can have it with the operational commander who is going to make that decision. And so I think this is my prediction is that, over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a shift to the people who can figure out how to integrate the data, whether it's inside of an AI model or between models or, however the system's working, but also who knows how to build the infrastructure to move it where it needs to be. I think those are the people who are going to become the new power brokers inside kind of the federal sector.
It's an incredible takeaway, and it's a really great place to end this conversation for right now. I think I could talk to you for like 5 hours about this and we could really nerd out. But Jen, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. I so enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to doing this again sometime. And thank you.
My name is Callye Keen, and this has been The Startup Defense.